The first thing anyone noticed about Elena Carter and Daniel Hayes was how well they fit inside a room. Together they completed the picture, like a final brushstroke that makes a canvas make sense. At their engagement dinner in the private salon of the Pierre, waiters moved like choreography through a constellation of white roses and flickering tapers. Elena wore ivory silk cut on the bias, a whisper against her skin. Daniel stood beside her in midnight wool, collar sharp, a quiet empire of restraint. Cameras from town and country and avenue were being politely discouraged. Both families preferred tasteful exclusivity, though everyone knew the photographs would appear anyway. Elena had not inherited power so much as translated it. Her mother, Marianne Carter, still chaired a publishing house that shaped how culture spoke about itself. Elena took that golden surname and built her own direction, reporting the front rows at Fashion Week, then advising those same maisons on the stories their runways should tell. By 31, she was the discreet hand behind at least 4 brand turnarounds, 2 capsule collaborations, and an LA concept store that influencers pretended they discovered themselves. She was good at elegance the way some are good at breathing. Daniel's pedigree came with stone lintels and Latin mottos. The Hayes family moved through Boston's Back Bay like a family crest had learned to walk. Lawyers, trustees, museum plaques bearing their surnames in dignified serif. Daniel was the variation, the artist who turned structural imagination into money you could live in. At Hayes & Company, he had shepherded a Manhattan tower from render to ribbon cutting and won the kind of award that sounded like a verb. He had a gift for glass that felt like air, for angles that forgave the eye. Their friends liked to say they were inevitable. He steadied her. She softened him. They met at a Whitney gala where the hors d'oeuvres had architectural intent and parted, as a joke, arguing about a stair in a private home by Lena Bobardi. The argument became dinner. Dinner became months. Months became a proposal at the cloisters, late autumn, when the heather held on to its color like a last, brave thought. Elena loved Daniel for several reasons that felt unassailable. He listened without telegraphing his opinion, he remembered her deadlines, he made tea before she knew she wanted it. In meetings he did not perform her brilliance back to her. He made space for it. Their lives layered. His early site visits, her late fittings, a shared morning run along the reservoir where the city learned how to be itself. And yet, there were moments, brief, almost courteous, when Daniel's gaze would drift to a middle distance as though the horizon had asked him a private question. Elena noticed and resented herself for noticing. Anxiety did not suit her, it wrinkled the narrative. Besides, what doubt could possibly survive their clarity? They came from families that taught them how to keep a glass from spilling, a secret from staining. The Carters and the Hayeses had shaken hands across tables more expensive than the average car. The guest list read like a fundraising committee. Connecticut for the ceremony. Fireflies if nature cooperated. Champagne that remembered its own name. Julia, Elena's best friend since Columbia, squeezed her hand as toasts began. "Breathe," she mouthed, and Elena did, smiling at Daniel's father's gentle joke about architects who draw houses so high they forget to come down for dinner. Laughter. Crystal. A chorus of toasts that sounded like the city congratulating itself. Afterward, on the terrace, a wind off the park lifted the tiny hairs at Elena's nape. She leaned into Daniel, and for a moment she felt the simple gravity of belonging, the way the body learns its home. He kissed her temple, and the world behaved as advertised. If a hairline crack existed, some seam where truth had not yet fused to expectation, it was invisible under the evening's lacquer. Perfection is shy, Elena thought, but it loves to be seen. She did not know then that perfection is also an excellent disguise. Before the suits that could pass at Davos and the renderings that sold air back to the sky, there was a dorm room with a bad poster of Mies van der Rohe and a boy with a camera who laughed like he had never been told not to. Mark Bennett, legally because his mother liked the clean miracle of a single syllable, appeared in Daniel's life during a late seminar on spatial memory. He argued that buildings remember us back. Daniel wanted to disagree, but the sentence stayed with him all night like a melody. They became friends in the uncomplicated way college allows. Coffee that becomes critique that becomes permission to say what you actually mean. Mark was not from money. He was from Ohio, from a line of people who knew exactly how much a dollar weighed and how to spend it twice. He shot photographs like a person having a conversation with light. He was the first person to tell Daniel that Boston's quiet could be violent, that genteel erasure is still erasure. They were 20 when the thing between them found its spine. No drama. No vows. They sat too close one February, and the radiator clicked like a metronome while the room learned a new language. The first kiss was clumsy, relieved, astonished. After, Daniel lay awake in a coin-bright terror. He had been raised inside a choreography where the steps were given. Boy, girl, ring, house. The choreography did not hate him, it simply refused to see him. Say it, Mark said later on the Harvard Bridge, wind a knife through flannel, water dark as a closed eye. Say who you are. I don't have a word I can keep, Daniel answered, and Mark, who had learned to live without velvet, said, then keep the truth and borrow the word. They graduated. Daniel put on the family name like a suit that would not forgive him for sweating. Mark shouldered a camera bag and learned to love cheap flights. The line between them lengthened but did not thin. Some loves do not respect distance because distance does not respect them. Fire Island became a compromise with the world, queer joy tucked between versions of the ocean, half privacy, half parade. Daniel treated those weekends like an amnesty he had not earned. Then Elena. It was not that she replaced anything, she rearranged the room. With her, Daniel felt a peace he had been told only one life could provide. He tried to stack his truths the way he stacked floor plates, evenly with the math behaving. He told himself that bisexuality meant inclusion, not betrayal, that love could be more than one thing if he was willing to hold it carefully. But careful is not the same as honest. Hayes and Company gave him responsibility that glowed. He was quoted, photographed, invited. Elena's rise brought her into those same rooms with a different credential. Hers had been earned without an old key. They became a pair that charities fought to seat well. On paper, the choice to marry her was obvious, even merciful. With Elena he could stop hiding. With Mark he could be seen. The body is poor at arithmetic, it can carry only so much. Mark watched him with the patience of someone who had already survived an answer. If you marry her like this, he warned one September night in a Williamsburg walk-up that smelled of turpentine and toast, you make me a sin and her a shelter. Neither of us deserves that. I'm trying, Daniel said, because trying is the most expensive word a coward owns. Then try telling the truth where it can hear you. They did not break. They bent. Daniel told himself he would choose after the wedding, as if vows could be returned within 30 days. He did not consider that time keeps its own books. He did not consider that secrets like water will find a level. He loved Elena. He loved Mark. The problem was not the number, it was the silence. And silence, in a city that never shuts up, can still be very loud. April made good on its promise. New York performed its spring. Trees misted into green, sidewalks rehearsed a new tempo, windows learned to be open. Elena's calendar was a geography of decisions. Table linens, ceremony string quartet, hand-painted menu cards with a spare serif that nodded to both families' taste. The ceremony would be at the Carters' Connecticut estate because the Lawns understood how to hold a dress. The rehearsal dinner would honor Boston with oysters and a string of toasts that would pretend to be spontaneous. Elena handled the wedding like a brand rollout, which is to say with grace and ruthless kindness. She had a team. She delegated. She rarely cried, and when she did, it was efficient and alone. Her mother, whose approval was a currency, watched her daughter with a pride that felt like an apology for all the ways work had taken her away when Elena was small. Daniel moved through fittings, tastings, final walkthroughs as if he were playing the one role he had never learned to understudy, groom. He was correct about everything. He praised the florist's restraint. He charmed the priest into shortening his homily by 12 minutes. He said all the words people need to hear from a man who is about to take a wife. He did not sleep well. The first fracture arrived with the calm of an email. Julia, who loved Elena enough to risk being unwelcome, wrote, saw Dee and Mark on Spring Street. Not my business. But they looked like a conversation I wasn't supposed to overhear. Elena read the message standing between two racks at a fitting, the air powdered with the idea of lace. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, the room resumed. Doubt is not always a scream. Sometimes it is the faintest change in light. That evening she asked Daniel, almost playfully, if he had seen Mark lately. He smiled the way people smile when they choose a single sentence from a crowded page. He dropped by the office, he said. He's pitching a series to an interiors magazine. It was a good line. It made sense. Elena let it dissolve on her tongue like sugar. In bed, she lay with her cheek to his shoulder and tried to measure faith. She had never been a jealous woman. Jealousy requires imagination and time, both of which she spent on work. The trouble with competence is that it teaches you to manage everything, including fear. Elena managed. She told herself that the story of Daniel and Mark was simple. Brothers in the way men permit closeness without naming it. She had seen them together. Their easy shorthand. The way Mark looked at Daniel like they had survived something together. She did not ask what. 2 nights before the wedding, Daniel went to see Mark. He told Elena it was a site meeting in Tribeca. He wore a jacket that fit him like a thought he meant to keep. Mark opened the door in paint-splattered denim and a t-shirt that had done too many things to be new. "Last time," Daniel said, and hated himself for making love sound like a bad habit. Mark studied him, tender and tired. "We are not a last time. We are the truth you keep treating like a rehearsal." "After this weekend I'll fix it," Daniel said. "I'll say everything." "Say it now," Mark replied, and when Daniel did not, they kissed like people say goodbye when neither believes it. On his way home, Daniel stopped on a corner and looked up at a building he had designed. Blast, Scott. The thing he knew how to do, make materials behave. He tried to imagine a structure that could hold two lives without collapsing. He failed. At the Carter townhouse, Elena was still awake, laptop open, approving the call sheet for the photographers. He watched her face, the competence, the care. He thought of vows like scaffolding. He wondered if the building he meant to build with her had already passed code. "Everything set?" she asked. "Almost," he said, and hoped the word would forgive him. The morning 2 days before the wedding unfolded with the kind of crisp order Elena trusted. A final call with the tent company, a revised seating chart to separate two trustees known for cordial warfare, a delivery of peonies that felt like a weather report, pink, abundant, persuasive. She drove up to Connecticut early to oversee the rentals. Daniel said he would join by late afternoon, something about a last-minute legal review on a project. At the estate, the study smelled like cedar and decisions. Elena opened Daniel's laptop to pull the caterer's invoice. She had his password because they had nothing to hide. The screen bloomed into life. Calendar, a clean desktop, a doc that mirrored her own in a way intimacy often does. She clicked mail. A notification nudged the corner. Drafts 1. She did not intend to click it. Her hand moved before she ordered it not to. The window opened with the logic of a trap. Subject, the life I can admit only here. Elena read. The words were not careful. They were alive. Mark, some nights I try to design a building for us. I keep failing because buildings require permits and I cannot get one for courage. I can't breathe inside this wedding. But Elena is good. She is good in the way a person deserves to be met. I want to stop lying to two people I love. I do not know if I can be that man yet. The room became too bright. Her face felt wrong, like she had borrowed it. She scrolled, found a sentence that would wake her for a year. When I am with you, I stop pretending I don't exist. Elena closed the laptop with the gentleness reserved for sacred things and bombs. She did not cry. Not at first. Her mind behaved like a crisis manager. Triage, containment, a list. Step 1, confirm. Step 2, confront. Step 3, don't break where anyone can see. She called Julia. "I found something," she said, and her voice had the steadiness of a person standing on a balcony that may or may not be there. "Come to the city," Julia urged. "Don't do this alone." "No," Elena replied. It was written to be alone. Daniel arrived at 4, the day beautiful in the kind of thoughtless way beauty can be. He kissed her cheek, she absorbed the gesture as data. In the study, she placed the laptop between them like a small, indifferent judge. "Open drafts," she said. His face changed by degrees, a cloud crossing a dignified sun. He did as asked. He read his own words like a man overhearing himself in a stairwell. He did not lie. He tried very briefly to narrate context. Old story, complicated, he had intended to tell her. After the wedding, after his father's speech, after the summer. He stopped because her eyes asked him to stop. "Are you in love with him?" Elena asked. Not accusation. Question. "Yes," he said. Not triumph. Grief. "And with me?" "Yes," he said again, and the word could not carry both. Elena sat. The chair did what chairs do, received weight, offered a shape to be tired in. She looked at the man she had chosen with competence and affection, and she saw a map. Lines where pressure had made paths. Rooms where he had refused to enter himself. She understood, with the clarity of a diagnosis, that love is not proof against the life you refuse to live. "We cancel," she said as if deciding catering. The tone saved her from melodrama. "We cancel because I will not be a screen you stand behind, and you will not be a villain in a story you're too careful to inhabit." He nodded as if someone else had been hoping she would say it first. "Tell me one thing," she added, because the heart insists on its particular. "Was there a time with me that was real?" "Every time," he said, and a truth can bruise as effectively as a lie. When he left the study, Elena allowed herself the smallest sound. It was not a sob. It was a hinge. She called the planner. She called the priest. She called her mother, who swallowed a generation's choreography and said, like a woman who has outlived her own myth, then we will hold you through it. Outside, workers staked lines in the lawn for a tent that would never be raised. The sky went on with its blue, indifferent and kind. Elena stood at the window and understood that a life can end without anyone dying. She also understood, unfairly soon, that endings are in the business of beginnings. The press release was a masterpiece of brevity and mercy. The families regret to share that the Carter-Hayes wedding will not take place. We ask for privacy as we navigate this difficult time. 2 sentences that held back an ocean. Within an hour, a Society columnist posted something surgical about irreconcilable creative differences, which, Elena admitted, would be a beautiful way to describe heartbreak if heartbreak cared about adjectives. Guests were phoned, diverted, refunded. The hotel in Greenwich reallocated rooms to a venture capital retreat. A florist cried because the peonies had come early and looked like a promise kept. Elena stood inside the machinery and let it do its work. If there is a skill she would wish for every woman at the end of an almost marriage, it is the ability to separate logistics from loss. Her father, who preferred numbers to narratives, arrived and offered the only sentence he trusted. We can absorb the costs. It was love translated into his dialect. Her mother brought soup and silence, which is stronger than advice. Julia sat on the floor, back against the closet, and read aloud from the contract so Elena wouldn't have to. There are many kinds of friendship. This is one. Daniel moved through a different choreography. He told his parents. His mother cried without speaking. His father did speak and should not have. Things about names, boards, benefactors who want their donations to behave. In his apartment that no longer felt like a place a person lives, Daniel called Mark and asked to meet somewhere that wouldn't make a scene. They chose a cafe where the coffee had opinions and the staff did not. Daniel told him everything. The draft, the confrontation, the cancellation, the fact that truth had finally happened to him like weather. Mark listened with a face that knew both relief and caution. So, he said, does the truth end with me or begin with you? I don't know how to stop being afraid, Daniel admitted, the sentence small as a confession in a second-grade classroom. You stop by letting the fear be bored, Mark replied. By doing the true thing so many times it loses its drama. And if the world burns down? It never does, Mark said gently. It just burns the costume. They did not kiss. Not then. There is a respect grief requires. They walked to the river and stood like men who had both lost and not lost the same thing. Meanwhile, the city did what cities do with gossip. Metabolized it into content. Elena's inbox became a glass bowl of sympathy, handwritten notes from women who understood the particular humiliation of loving a myth, emails from men who had outlived their father's definitions, a DM from a stranger who said, "You will breathe again and not notice you're doing it." She saved that one. At night, in the Connecticut bedroom that had been staged for bridal photographs, Elena lay very still and negotiated with the future. The first stage of grief for the competent is a calendar purge. She deleted reminders. She kept only the Tuesday yoga she never went to. She did not stalk. She did not spiral. She did, however, allow herself to hate the word perfect, which had failed to include the possibility of being human. On what would have been the rehearsal dinner evening, she returned to Manhattan. The city received her as it receives everyone, without ceremony but with options. She looked at her life and found it intact. Company, clients, a team that had quietly rerouted deadlines. She looked at her heart and found it making a new sound, like an instrument after a repair. Not better. Truer. In a quiet hour that did not announce itself, Elena opened her notes app and wrote a sentence. I will not measure love by how well it performs in photographs. She did not yet know who would deserve that sentence. It was enough for now that she did. The Monday after the wedding that wasn't, Manhattan moved on as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Taxis still shouted down Fifth Avenue. Traders still cursed at blinking numbers. Shop windows still rehearsed spring. Yet for Elena Carter, the city had learned a cruel new trick, reflecting her face back to her everywhere she turned. At Dean and DeLuca, 2 women whispered while pretending to inspect peaches. At her favorite coffee spot on Madison, the barista gave her the latte on the house, his sympathy steaming above the cup. She wasn't angry at them. She was angry at the narrative, the way New York collects stories and spins them into cautionary tales. The golden girl jilted by her perfect man. Her phone remained a theater of pity. Messages stacked like bricks, thinking of you so sorry time heals. Her mother wanted her in Connecticut to recover privately. Her father wanted her to release a statement that clarified the situation. Elena chose neither. She stayed in Manhattan, inside the penthouse she had bought with her own earnings. The space was white walls, glass tables, and an uncomfortable honesty. She had designed it to be a home for two. Meanwhile, Daniel lived in exile inside his Tribeca apartment, blinds drawn, whiskey half-finished. Hayes and Company was bleeding clients. His father threatened to cut him from the firm, not because of who he was, but because he hadn't controlled the scandal. Reputation in that world was capital. And Daniel had burned through his account. Mark visited once. He stood in the doorway, hands shoved in his pockets, watching the man who had once dazzled rooms sit crumpled on a couch. "You can't hide here," Mark said quietly. Daniel laughed without humor. "Funny. That's all I've ever done, hide. First from my family. Then from myself. Then from her. Maybe this is the punishment." Mark sat down beside him. "It's not punishment, Daniel. It's consequence. There's a difference. You lied because you were afraid. Now you get to decide who you'll be without the lie." The conversation lingered in Daniel's mind long after Mark left. He wasn't ready to be brave. But he wasn't able to go back either. Elena, on the other hand, filled her days with activity that felt like scaffolding. She dove into work, finalizing a campaign for a French fashion house. She worked late, ordered sushi at midnight, and pretended the silence was productive. At night, though, loneliness pressed against her ribs. She replayed Daniel's confession in her mind. "Yes, I love him. Yes, I love you too." The duplicity cut deepest not because it was secret, but because parts of it had been true. On what would have been her honeymoon morning, Elena stood at the window of her penthouse, looking down at the city. Somewhere in that sprawl, Daniel and Mark might be walking together. Somewhere, strangers were discussing her pain like a tabloid puzzle. Somewhere, life insisted on continuing. She whispered aloud to herself as though testing the sound of survival, "You are not broken. You were betrayed. That's not the same." It wasn't healing. But it was a start. Elena had always believed in control. Her calendar was orderly, her closets color-coded, her career built on meticulous planning. But heartbreak is an anarchist. It rearranged her nights into jagged fragments, her mornings into slow climbs. Her therapist, recommended by Julia, listened with the stillness of a mountain. "You loved a version of him he wanted you to see," the woman said. "That doesn't make your love false. It makes his presentation false." Elena nodded, but the truth landed unevenly. She couldn't escape the humiliation. Society had worshipped their perfection, and now society feasted on its collapse. At lunches with clients, she felt eyes measuring her, calculating how scandal had depreciated her value. She reminded herself she wasn't a stock. One evening, she accepted Julia's invitation to a gallery opening in Chelsea. She wore a sharp black suit, hair pinned back, lipstick a crimson armor. She walked into the space like she owned it, but her chest was brittle glass. Whispers followed her. She ignored them. Until, "Miss Carter?" a voice asked, warm but hesitant. She turned. A man stood holding a glass of wine, his shirt sleeves rolled to reveal ink stains on his fingers. He was not polished like Daniel, not sculpted by old money. He was different, scruffy, with the kind of authenticity that couldn't be styled. "I'm Adrian," he said. "We met briefly at the Hayes and Company gala last fall. I was playing saxophone. You probably don't remember." She did vaguely. The music had been haunting that night. She remembered him more now for his eyes, earnest, unembarrassed by her reputation. "Of course," she replied, polite. They spoke for 10 minutes about the exhibition, about the weather, about nothing that mattered. Yet Elena left with her heart strangely lighter. Not healed, but curious. That night, Daniel sat across the city, staring at blueprints he could no longer focus on. His phone buzzed with Mark's name. He ignored it. He feared the courage it demanded. Elena, meanwhile, replayed Adrian's voice in her mind. It was not love. It was not even attraction. It was the reminder that the world still contained men who looked at her without pity or betrayal. And sometimes, survival begins with remembering possibilities. Adrian Miller lived in a converted loft in Brooklyn where the paint peeled and rent was paid partly in performances. His life was messy, unpolished, the opposite of Daniel's curated perfection. He bartended nights to support his jazz, scribbled lyrics on napkins, and carried a trumpet case scarred from years of travel. When Elena saw him again, this time at a fundraiser for arts education, he greeted her with the same unstudied smile. "Still surviving the art world?" he teased, and she found herself laughing. Over the weeks that followed, they met by coincidence that began to feel like design. Coffee after her meetings in Soho. A late-night burger after his set in the Village. Adrian asked questions that no one else asked, About her work, her dreams before Daniel, the things she did when no one was watching. One night she confessed, "I don't know if I'll ever trust again." Adrian's answer was simple. "You don't have to right now. Trust isn't an exam. It's a muscle. It heals when you use it a little at a time." The word stayed with her. Unlike Daniel, Adrian made no promises of perfection. He admitted his failures easily, the record deal that collapsed, the brother he barely spoke to, the nights he doubted his own talent. His honesty was terrifying, but it was real. For the first time since the cancellation, Elena felt the stirrings of something dangerous and beautiful. Hope. Elena resisted. Every instinct told her not to leap again. But Adrian didn't demand leaps, he offered steps. Small ones. He took her to a Brooklyn jazz bar where the lights were dim and the music carried the air itself. Watching him play, head tilted back, trumpet alive in his hands, Elena felt something shift. It wasn't attraction alone. It was recognition. Here was a man who lived without masks. Afterward, as they walked beneath a string of street lamps, Adrian asked, "Why do you keep looking at me like you're waiting for me to disappear?" "Because people do," Elena whispered. "I'm not people," he replied. "I'm me. That's all I know how to be." It wasn't grand. It wasn't poetry. But it was true. That night, in his loft filled with records and second-hand furniture, Elena allowed herself to kiss him. It was clumsy, hesitant, nothing like the choreographed perfection she had shared with Daniel. And it was the most honest kiss she had ever known. Meanwhile, Daniel finally answered Mark's call. They met in a quiet diner in Queens. Mark looked at him with both love and exhaustion. "You can keep hiding," Mark said, "or you can start living. But you can't do both." For Daniel, the words were both condemnation and salvation. Elena didn't know where Daniel's path would lead. She only knew that for the first time in months, her own path no longer frightened her. 6 months later, spring returned to Manhattan. Elena stood inside a small jazz club in the West Village, the kind of place where tables were too close and the music didn't care. Adrian was on stage, trumpet lifted, pouring himself into sound. The room swayed to him, alive in his imperfection. Elena sat near the front, a glass of wine in her hand, and smiled, not the practiced smile of photographs, but the quiet one that belonged only to her. She had rebuilt her company stronger than before. She had survived whispers that eventually faded. And she had chosen not to measure her worth by the life she almost had, but by the one she was creating. Across town, Daniel walked hand in hand with Mark through Central Park. It wasn't easy. His parents still disapproved. His firm had downsized. But he had stopped hiding. For the first time he lived without dividing himself. When Adrian's set ended, he came down to Elena, sweat shining at his temple. He kissed her forehead in front of everyone. Not a performance. Just truth. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm better than okay," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm free." She realized then that Daniel's betrayal had not destroyed her chance at a soulmate, it had cleared the path to the one she was meant to find. Not perfect. Not polished. But hers. In that smoky little club, Elena Carter learned what forever truly meant, not perfection. Not performance. But choice, honesty, and love brave enough to be flawed. And for the first time, forever didn't frighten her. It felt like home.